Good afternoon. Our speaker today is Alexander Munya, Assistant Director of IT Audits at the University of Miami. He'll be sharing with us how the university automated their purchase card review process. This webcast is not for CPE credit, but you will receive a number of practical takeaways that will allow you to begin implementing your own PCard system right away. Alex began using IDEA in 2006 and quickly realized that he could use the software to help the university move from periodic random sampling of PCard transactions to 100% coverage. His ability to use technology to overcome challenges and streamline the audit process in his department and other departments across the university led to him being recognized as the 2015 U.S. IDEA User of Excellence. Alex has done great work at the University of Miami, and we are pleased to have him here today to share his processes. Alex, I will now turn the webcast over to you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexander Muina, and I am the Assistant Director of IT Audits for the Office of Advisory Services at the University of Miami. I want to welcome and thank all the ACUA members who have joined the webcast. I want to thank IDEA for providing the forum to share our success in assisting our purchase cards group to automate its PCard review process using IDEA. When I was asked by Automation to share our success of automating the PCard review process using IDEA with the ACUA community, I couldn't have been happier. ACUA has always been a wealth of knowledge and support for many of our audit projects at the university through its ACUA LServ list, through its trainings and conferences. I can't thank the ACUA community enough for all its support over the years. Today during our webcast, we'll be hitting certain topics including understanding of the background behind the university and our audit group. We're going to discuss the benefits and the challenges faced with having a purchase card system. We're going to look at the initiatives to automate PCard processes. We're going to look at the different groups we work with to accomplish this. We're going to look at how we created queries, reports, and then how we automated them through scripts. We're also going to look at the benefits of automating a PCard process. And finally, we're going to look at lessons learned and future projects we'd like to do using data analytics and IDEA. Let's briefly talk about the university. The university was founded in 1925. It has an enrollment of approximately over 16,000 students. The university has 11 schools and colleges. Has more than 180 majors and programs. The university has been recognized the last 6 years by U.S. News and World Report as one of the prominent universities, and we've also been recognized for our graduate school. The university is a private research university with $330 million in external research funding and an annual budget of approximately $2.7 million. The university is composed of 3 campuses. We have a Coral Gables campuses that house mainly our academic, financial, and administrative groups. We have a Miller School of Medicine. The Miller School of Medicine consists of 3 hospitals that we own, the University of Miami Hospital, the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, and the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. And in addition to that, we have an 800-plus physician practice plan. The 3rd campus is our Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science. This group is constantly generating research projects and grants. Our audit group consists of 13 auditors, which 5 of those auditors are solely dedicated to medical audits. So now let's look at the benefits of having a PCard purchasing system. One of the benefits of having a PCard purchasing system is it's very convenient. It empowers the users at the department level to make small and urgent purchases that they wouldn't be able to make through a typical AP process of payments. They'd have to typically, to make a payment through the AP system, each individual vendor would have to be vendorized. Then the AP system would have to set up a PO for that vendor and purchases made through those POs, and a check would have to be cut. So by having a credit card system, ours is Amex, to make PCard purchases, it is definitely much more convenient for all departments to make these smaller and more urgent purchases. It's also very cost effective because, as we mentioned before, to have an AP system make a lot of these smaller purchases would require the purchasing department to set up the vendor. It would require the AP department to set up a PO for that vendor, and then we'd also have to have a check issued out or a wire transfer for each payment, where through a PCard process, the procurement and payment process are automated through your processor, which our case is Amex. Based on the fact that these payments are made instantaneously to vendors, vendors are able to set up favorable pricings with institutions because they don't have to wait for an open receivable to be paid by the institution. They're instantaneously paid, and that benefit is given back to the university by providing us more favorable pricing. One of the big benefits is that our purchasing departments and our AP systems aren't overtaxed with small typical transactions that are done through PCards. They're able to concentrate on higher dollar values and monitor those transactions, which are a bigger concern, limiting the university to more exposure. These are the perks, and now we're going to look at some of the inherent risks of having a purchasing card system. That same power that you give to employees to make all these small purchases also can be the beginning of the potential of fraud. Many of these cardholder users feel that they've been empowered through the university to have a credit limit, and sometimes they feel that these credit limits can be used for their own personal purchases, which lead to many fraud and abuses. Another inherent risk of a purchasing card system is the volume of transactions. Typically, the volume created from these small transactions tends to be voluminous, and it's very hard to monitor and track for both a PCard office and the departments. Also, the process is very manual and paper-driven from the perspective of PCard holders must produce receipts for all their purchases and track those purchases and reconcile those. In our case, all these receipts that are obtained by cardholders are submitted to our PCard department. Our PCard department is responsible for obtaining all these receipts and scanning them into the university system in order so they can be provided as support for all purchases. These receipts tend to cause a lack of proper documentation. As you know, anybody who's dealt with any type of PCards knows that in order to reconcile, to have proper receipts are lost, hard to read, hard to identify, currency exchanges. There's a lot of proper documentation for these purchases, which can lead to a lot of abuse and improper purchases. Finally, all these challenges with the high volume of transactions, the complexity of tabulating all these receipts causes the PCard office to not be able to properly review all transactions because they're inundated with the volume and the amount of PCard transactions. Now I want to talk about how we got involved automating the PCard review process here at the university. As a result of a few frauds at the university, it was the opinion of the board management and our CAE that a continuous monitoring process using data analytics would enhance the university's control structure. We incorporated data analytics as part of the PCard audit that we undertook. We found that through data analytics, inappropriate PCard charges that were not being identified by the PCard office as a result of our review. Part of our findings from our audit was that we recommended that data analytics be used as part of the PCard office review process. Unfortunately, the PCard office was very limited in staff, and they lacked the technical expertise to do the proper data analytics. As a result, the PCard office reached back to us and asked us if we could possibly, since we already had created data analytics, if we can possibly set up a review process through data analytics for them. As a result, this became our pilot continuous monitoring initiative at the university. Let me discuss how the PCard process works at the university. We currently have three types of PCards. We have an individual purchase PCard, which consists of 90% of all purchases with day-to-day typical purchases. Then we have a travel card that uses the PCard, is called the STC card, and that's used for any type of travel and expenses related to travel. And then we have a special purpose card, what we call a SPA card or SPA card, that's used just mainly for cell phone bills and any type of cell phone data, bills that we would, a cardholder would incur, our department would incur. American Express provides the PCard statements to our cardholder users, and they provide all the transaction purchase data to our PCard office. The process we have in place here, as I mentioned before, is all the PCard holders must reconcile their statements to their receipts and submit those receipts to our PCard office, which is responsible to scan all those receipts for the entire university for all PCard purchases and provide them as support for our general ledger. As far as reviewing the PCard office, before we automated the process, they did a review 9 out of the 12 months. They did a random sample review of only 20% of the population. The remaining 3 months, which were November, December, and January, which were the holidays, which is the time of period where we see the most abuse, they were required to test 100% of the population. But as we noted earlier, they lacked the proper resources to be able to do this kind of testing. So even though they were required to do this testing, many times we found that they just didn't have the time and effort needed to provide this type of support for testing. Also, as you noticed, they did random sampling through 75% of the year, 3/4 of the year. And random sampling is unguided sampling, where you're just taking a random group of 20% of the population, and you may not be getting a good analysis, as opposed to where you do data analysis, where you have specific criteria that you're set up to determine inappropriate charges, and the only transactions that you're testing have been identified as the criteria that are typically seen for abuse. Finally, they would test for such things as misuse of cards, non-business related purchases, and splitting. Splitting is when each card of the 3 cards, they have certain daily limits and monthly limits that they're allowed to purchase. And splitting, what typically happens in splitting is the PCard holder knows that they can, for instance, on a PCard, they can only purchase daily, make a purchase of $2,000. What they might do in order to split is they might make a purchase with a vendor for 1/2 of the charge, and then make a second purchase for a second half of the charge, so that one individual charge doesn't exceed the limit. But if you add those 2 charges together, which is really the true purchase, it does exceed the limit. So let me review quickly our PCard process. Again, our PCard processor is Amex. We make requests that we'd like employees to be able to use the PCards, so we make requests to Amex to issue cards to our card holders. The Amex will issue the cards to the PCard office, and the PCard office distribute those cards to the card holders in order to make purchases. And the Amex will also provide statements to the card holders, and they will provide all the purchase transactions from all the card holders to our PCard office. Once our PCard office obtains that the transaction information from American Express, they'll map those individual PCard holder transactions to their accounts, and that information will be recorded in our general ledger to track all PCard purchases. In order to automate our PCard process, we decided to use our data analytics tool, IDEA. We've been using IDEA since 2006. We use IDEA for our risk planning as we create our audit plan for the year. We use it to tabulate through the data to determine whatever our risk. So we use IDEA to tabulate this information and produce exceptions or outliers to identify certain risks that we want to address during the year. In addition to that, we use IDEA for transaction testing. Before, we would only do similar to what the PCard office is doing. We'd have an audit, and we'd do a certain percentage, small percentage of random sampling of transactions. But now through IDEA, we're able to do 100% testing of any particular audit project that we're doing, and we have tremendous cost savings and time savings, and by having specialized queries that we run through IDEA to do data analytics that only identifies exceptions based on parameters we set. This time and cost savings has allowed us to be more efficient in our audits, as we're able to spend more time in planning by these time savings and internal controls. When I was working, before I started working at the university, I worked for public accounting, and that was one of the biggest issues for the partners, is they always wanted to find abilities to do less detailed testing and spend more time in internal control reviews, and IDEAs afford us that ability. In addition to that, we used IDEA for our investigations to look through certain things, vendor information, and so forth, and it's been very profitable for us. we have incorporated IDEA to be a staple as part of our audit. We contracted IDEA to come down and do a training for our whole staff. We were very fortunate to get Teresa Patrick. She was an outstanding trainer. She trained our whole staff on using IDEA. She was very much into pushing us to using our actual data, and after we scrubbed it and provided it to her the first day, she was able to incorporate that for the remaining 2 days of the training into our whole training structure, and it was very beneficial to us. As a matter of fact, it allows us to, one of the projects we're working on now is AP, and it came out of some of the test data that was used as part of the trainings. So I'd like to thank Teresa again for all her help. In addition, as I said before, IDEA has been very beneficial for us because we're allowed to do 80, 90, 100% testing on all transactions and only look at those transactions that meet certain criteria. So we're not lost in the weeds of looking for transactions that aren't relevant. We're only looking at specific transactions that have been flagged through exception reporting and data analysis, and that has been a huge cost savings to us that made us more efficient. Now I want to talk about what we did to actually automate the PCard review program for the PCard office. We decided we were going to handle this as a typical system implementation, so we divided it up to certain steps that we needed or processes that we needed to get done in order to provide the PCard office with a complete data analytics tool to review their PCard transactions that was thoroughly done, reviewed, and approved by all the parties involved. In order to do that, we set up 5 steps. The first step was planning, installation, and setup. The next step was requirement gathering. What this entailed is what information we were going to need to pull from the American Express system as far as data to do our analysis, and what queries we're going to need to design and build in order to provide the proper reporting of exceptions or potential exceptions that needed to be investigated in order to properly review and monitor our PCard transactions. The next step was to design and develop the report, the queries, reports, and scripts. From there, we had to test these queries, reports, and scripts in order to make sure that they were functioning properly, that we weren't getting the least amount of false positives, that the queries and reports were providing the information that the PCard office and the individual departments were going to need in order to follow up on these exceptions that were noted through our queries and reports. And then finally, we wanted to deploy this to be a simple as possible method to monitor PCard transactions through exception reporting for our PCard office because of their limited resources. So what we want to do is create a system that is very functional, self-contained, and easy to use, but at the same time, we want to create a system that the PCard office could slowly begin to understand and use on their own and take full control of the reviewing process. In order to do that and stay on task and create all that, what we did is we created this timeline for project management, and we set up certain milestones that we want to create and parties that we needed to be involved. And even though you see in this column where you see the number of days after the particular task, it didn't take. If you look at this, it looks like it took us 2 months. It did. We basically did do it over 2 months. However, we didn't take 60 days to actually do it. Within each one of these days, there's, based on, we all had multiple projects we were working on, so all the parties involved spent an hour or 2 during these days in order to accomplish what we had to. But really, if I had to put it in days, I would say we could have completed this whole project if it was the only thing that we're doing in roughly a week or a week and a half from beginning to end. So it really wasn't as time-consuming as it may look here, but we did need to set this up in order to make sure that we did stay on task. The next couple of slides go into detail exactly what we did in order to complete all those steps. But really, what I want to be able to do is do a demo for you to show you how powerful the system is using IDEA and what great things you can do, and how even with a user with very little knowledge of IDEA or scripting, how they can potentially build to do what we did here for our PCard office. So really, the main steps to automate the PCard review process entailed identifying PCard transaction data that was going to be needed. This required us to work with the PCard office to go into the Amex system, to their management system, and set up a template report that would be used on a monthly basis to do the transaction reviews. So we had to go in and identify what fields we were going to need in order to review these transactions for our exception reporting. So we set up a template in there so that each month or each period that the PCard office wanted to review the PCard transactions, all they needed to do was go in, set the particular time period they'd like to do the review, and then all the fields are already automated, and the template would produce a text file that will be stored on the PCard office share drive. And that file later used by IDEA in order to draw in and do the analysis from. So the first step was to identify the data we need. Once we did that, we need to determine what data queries we wanted to use in order to identify inappropriate charges. So this is the queries we used to identify the charges that we felt that were going to be inappropriate, and these queries had to be set up in a parameter basis so that we would produce the least amount of false positives as possible. The next thing is once we determine the data and the queries, we had to identify from all the exceptions that we got from the queries, identify potential inappropriate charges. We had to identify what data sources with the PCard office and the departments are going to need in order to follow up with these exceptions. In other words, what fields on the reports were they're going to need in order to investigate why these potential outliers that are produced from these reports, what information is going to need to follow up and determine whether these are actual inappropriate charges or possibly a false positive. The next thing we needed to do was to automate the import, the queries, and reports using scripting. What we didn't want to have the PCard office to do is go in every time, or you wouldn't want your users to go in every time, have to create an import. The import is to bring in that text file from whatever your data source is, identify how that file is set up, whether it's a character, and then identify the different fields you want to import and determine whether that field is a character field, whether it's a numeric field or it's a date field, how many characters or how much spacing each field is going to need. You don't want them to have to go through that cumbersome process. So the scripting allowed us to automate that whole process. And that goes also for the queries. Once we set up the queries and we determined which ones we wanted to script them, so each time we wanted to run those queries, we didn't have to regenerate them, so in order to make this the most efficient and functioning system for the user. And finally, from the queries, we identified certain exceptions, and those exceptions were going to be exported out to an Excel report so that could be used by the PCard office and by the departments in order to follow up on the exceptions. We wanted to, again, script those reports so that every time we wanted to create a report, we didn't have to go in and identify which fields we wanted and how the sorting of the report was going to be done. The scripting allowed us to automate that process, so every time we ran the queries, it would produce reports in the manner and sort sequence that we wanted that was most efficient for the PCard office and the users. And then finally, we wanted to create an executable program to be run from the PCard office's desktop, where they didn't have to get involved in any of the programming, scripting, or query process, and slowly work them into understanding how that works so they could do that in the future on their own. I'm going to discuss now is all the queries we used to automate the process, and explain to you what the benefits of all these queries. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the queries that we found that were most beneficial in order to identify inappropriate PCard charges. The first query is probably the one that has provided the most benefit to us, which is the round dollar query. What this essentially does is it identifies all purchases made in round dollars. Typically, we found at the university that's common with fraud that we've experienced here is that funds that are misappropriated are typically done in round dollar amounts. And the reason being is if I'm going to make an improper entry into the system or try to make an improper purchase, in order to cover that purchase up through journals or general ledger entries into the system. I don't want to have to deal with 99 cents. If I have 5 transactions, I have 199 cents and 89 cents and a dime. In order to reconcile that and to track that, if I'm going to try to bury that within the general ledger or through journals, it's very hard to track with dollars and cents and unusual amounts like 231 or so forth. So typically we found this fraud is typically done in transactions amounts that are round, and that's just been our experience. So the round dollar value has been a very fruitful query for us, and it has brought up a lot of inappropriate charges in the past. The next query has to do with identifying merchants, and what this query undertakes is, what we do is we go to the supplier field from the American Express data, and what we do is we search for vendors who are typically not vendors that we use in the normal course of business. Including those vendors would be Macy's, Pottery Barns, Nordstrom's. These are also typical vendors, Walmart, that we found in the past that employees will abuse and use as they feel that the purchase card is their own personal credit card, and they'll go ahead and make these purchases and justify the charges and say that the university isn't properly compensating them, so they have all the right in the world to use these PCard charges to make these kind of purchases. It's just compensating them for work they've done that the university hasn't compensated them for. But what we found is that there's certain vendors, these are a couple examples, that are abused by PCard holders to make improper purchases. The next query is unusual vendors. Unusual vendors is similar to identified merchants because we use the same field. However, what we do, instead of using specific names such as Macy and Pottery Barn, we use keywords. Any vendors that have the word cash, advance, children, toys, babies, etc., things that we found in the past that people typically use a PCard inappropriately to make non-business purchases that are inappropriate, or unapproved based on the university parameters. And typically the vendors we found have, and somewhere in the vendor name, they have this type of wording. This has been somewhat successful. Particularly, we found a lot of times that people will use their PCard to make purchases for their kids, and that's why we use the word children, toy, baby in the name. And it has been very fruitful for us as far as identifying improper purchases. The next query has to do with weekend purchases, and these are purchases made on the weekend. This typically, along with the holiday purchases, well, the basis behind this is typically employees will make purchases of PCards for business-related transactions on the days that they're actually working. If they're on holiday, if it's a weekend, that's when we find the PCards our purchases tend to be most abused, where employees are making purchases, particularly especially during the holidays when times are off and people are short and on cash, and they don't want to disappoint family in providing them with gifts, so they tend to use the PCard to subsidize their purchasing power, especially during these times. So this is why we run these two reports, because typically employees won't make business-related purchases on these days. The next query has to do with MCC codes or SIC codes. There's certain SIC or MCC codes that are commonly abused by employees. So what we do is we do a search for those MCC codes, and then we sort them by employees to see if there's a consistent pattern by certain employees to use these codes, and then we investigate them further. Another query that we do is on taxes. This is a very simple query, but what it does is it identifies any sales tax that may be charged on a purchase. Since a university is a non-for-profit institution, we use this report to identify any sales tax paid by card holders, and then we follow them up or the PCard office follows them up to get reimbursement for these sales tax. One of the reports I particularly found to be useful is the duplicate credit cards. What this report consists of is, since ours is a little bit more complicated, we have 3 different cards. Any particular user at one point in time can have 3 different cards: a purchase card, a travel card, and a special purpose card. So what we did is we ran queries to determine were there any users who had more than 3 cards listed to their unique identification number. And the reason we use identification number, the employee number, is because if we did it by name, we wouldn't be as fruitful from this report, because what we found is, and in a few cases, is some employees have either their maiden name and their married name. They have a card in their maiden name and their married name. Sometimes they have their middle name as the card name, so then they're issued another card. And we found employees who have 3, 4, 5, 6 cards when at most they should have 3. So this report has been very beneficial as to identifying users who have multiple cards that they shouldn't have. The next query is purchases in excess of credit limits. Each of our 3 cards have a single item and a monthly limit. And you would think this would be a misnomer, that we wouldn't need this report, but this report is constantly needed because it helps the PCard office and the departments determine whether cardholders are fulfilling their obligation to not purchase beyond a certain amount in a single day and beyond their monthly limits. Typically, you think of that it wouldn't be allowed to and the card would be stopped. That's not the case, but what happens a lot of times, departments request credit limits. The PCard office will authorize them for a particular purchase, but then they won't go back and adjust the system to not allow those purchases in excess of their R limits. So this report has been very fruitful for the PCard office to make sure that they're going back in and properly setting those limits for each user. Splitting, as we talked before, is when a cardholder will try to avoid these limits by splitting up purchases in multiple purchases, so they don't, an individual purchase won't exceed these limits, or in a monthly purchase they'll make a purchase at the end of the month, and then at the beginning of the month they'll make the rest of the purchase so that the 2 purchases combined exceed the limit, but the purchase within a particular month, the total purchase a particular month won't. So this is, one of the essential reports in any PCard review process. And then finally we have the 20% of purchase report, where we've identified that 80% of all PCard transactions relate to 20% of the PCard holders. So this report does is it allows us to identify PCard purchasers who, the top 20% who have the highest total purchase or the highest total amount of transactions. And we key on these groups in order to do additional testing. Before I get into the benefits of us automating the review process, what I wanted to go into now is show you a demo and the strength of what we were able to create through IDEA for our PCard group in order to review their purchase card transactions. So what I'm going to pull up here is I'm going to pull up IDEA. This is the IDEA screen. What I want to show you now is how the process worked in IDEA and how we set up, how we were able to automate this whole process for our PCard office using IDEA, and the strength and the power that IDEA has to create exception reporting, and how easy and simple it is. Although, what you're going to see here looks very complex, it was very simple. Every single script that I created here, I think 99% of all the scripts I was able to go in and create through the macro function, which basically is you can use a macro recorder to record every step you do, so you don't actually have to do the script coding. There may be a couple of things, and the IDEA Help Desk can help you if the recording doesn't flow properly. We found that the IDEA Help Desk was very helpful in working with us to identify ways where we can make the whole script flow from our recordings. Initially we set it up through our own scripting knowledge, but if we had to do any tweaks or changes, we definitely use the recorder because it enabled us to create the scripts without having to spend the time to do them. So the first thing I want to do is show you how the process begins. The process begins by the PCard Office Manager will go into the Amex system, and they will generate a report from the report template that was created in Amex for all the different fields that we want to produce to do our data analysis and our queries. The PCard Office Manager will go into the management component in Amex, will set the period of time for which they want to download the data they use in the analysis, and they'll go into the Amex system and create an export of that data. That information from the Amex system will be exported out, and it will be sent to the PCard Office's shared drive. That file that's sent it'll be a text file, and that text file will be used as a source document to do our analysis and IDEA. So IDEA will actually go out, and it will go to the share file, has the ability to go out of the system itself, go based on the path you set up to your own share file, pull in that file, and do the import of data so you can do your analysis and run your queries. The file that was created through the Amex system is a typical text file. It's not comma delimited. I use tildes because I find tildes have the least amount of issues, especially with description fields. And then it shows you all the different data fields that we pulled down from the American Express system, the unique employee ID, their cardholder information, their name, their address. We pulled down the vendor information, their unique identifier, their MCC code, their name, their description, their address. We also pulled down the account information related to each cardholder so that when these exception reports are created, we can filter them out to departments based on their accounts. Additional fields are the charge date in order to make sure it's within a certain period of time, which is always important. And we also pulled down the tax information, if any sales tax was charged on transactions, and then the total amount of charges for each purchase. So this is a text file that's used and imported into IDEA so it can create all its queries. So once the office manager goes in and creates that report through the template for the particular period in time in which he wants to do the analysis, he goes into IDEA, and then he runs the IDEA script we set up that generates all the queries and the reports. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into IDEA, and I'm going to show you the script that we created to run this whole process. What we did is, as you see on the top, each individual call relates to a particular query that we've created. The first one actually doesn't relate to a query, it relates to the importing of the data. That's the data here that we showed you just a second ago that was exported from the Amex system, the text file. That first script right here, the X import, will import all that data into IDEA so it can run these queries against it. What I want to show you is coming down here is this is all the information. The first one is the import. The import will pull the data from wherever you have it stored. On this case, I have it stored on my C drive. In the PCard office, it's stored on a shared drive, so you can set up that path. So in other words, IDEA is not only self-contained. The scripting allows you to go outside of the system and get data and bring it in, which is a huge advantage. Once the import is completed, then it'll run the first query, which is X round, which has to do with our round dollar query. What I want to show you here is it shows you how all the different steps we needed in order to create that query. I also wanted to show you that through this scripting, we're able to sort the once we run the query and it produces the exceptions and produces the outlier report, we're able to sort that report within the scripting, and we're able to determine what fields we want for each individual report, which are all these fields here, that can be used by the PCard office and departments in order to follow up on our exception reports. Each one of these queries has a report that's created from it, and once all these reports are all called, all these reports will be sent out and stored here on the shared drive. What it does is each report for each type of query, it creates an Excel, it exports out an Excel report, which is an exception report based on the query parameters for all the follow-up that needs to be done by the PCard office and the departments in order to follow up potential purchase issues with our card holders. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and run that query, and what I want you guys to keep in mind and pay attention to is you'll see in this share drive out there what you'll see is the reports will start to populate in here as IDEA imports the data and then starts creating the queries and creating the reports. It'll export those Excel reports out to the university's shared drive and start populating the shared drive. And once it's completed, then it has all the exception reports that the PCard office and the departments will need in order to do their follow-up on any potential exceptions for purchases. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and do that. What you're going to see is a lot of flashing, and the reason I created that is so you can see all the different gyrations that the system goes through and how it burns through the data quickly. So you're going to see it go through hundreds of thousands of transactions, and you're going to see it go through hundreds of routines. And throughout this process, what you're going to do is it's going to import all the data from the Amex file. Then it'll run queries to determine if there's any exceptions. Once those exceptions have identified, it's going to go and create an exception report in Excel and then export those reports to the shared drive outside of the system to be used by the PCard office and the departments. So I want you to keep in mind is you'll see flashing back and forth and you'll start seeing the green Excel reports populating in here. So once the PCard office manager has imported or exported the reports from Amex, it'll run the script, and here we go. As you can see, these are all the different gyrations that are being done, and you can see how it's starting to populate. See the green reports starting to be populated, identified, round dollars, unusual, vendors, weekends. These are the reports that are going to be used by the PCard office and the different departments to follow up on any exceptions and outliers and potential inappropriate charges. So that's basically the whole script and the whole process. It went and produced all these reports. These are all Excel reports. And then the great part of this is we've left this open for the user at the PCard office so they can start beginning to understand how the system works, how they can use it. It also opens them up to go back into the system. If they see something that they want to adjust or fix or add, they're responsible for the parameters, and they can go in and do that right here through IDEA. We're always there to assist them if they get stuck on any technical issues, but deciding on what the parameters are, what they want to test, and how they want to go about their testing, that's their responsibility, and that's important for us to keep our independence. As you can see here, these are all the different scripts that we created, and then I'm going to expand this out and show you all the different sequences of scripts and reports that were generated through IDEA. See, these are all the different scripts and reports that are generated in order to get our queries and our exception reports. And here these tabs are all the different reports. So if at any point in time the PCard office wants to go in and see how was this created or what's here, in addition to the reports, it can actually go to the actual data. What I want to show you is the PCard split criteria. What we have here is these are all the PCard cardholders who have been identified as potentially having done a split in order to avoid the $2,000 daily credit limit or daily purchase limit for each cardholder user. And what IDEA allows you to do is it produces, these are the number of records within that cardholder that will create the split. And here we're going to look at this one as an example. It allows you to go in and see the actual detail. And this particular user, which is Mickey Mouse, they made purchases to the supplier Amazon. They made purchases on the 13th, the same day, for $1281.86. And this is an example of a split, because if you take these two amounts, they exceed the $2,000 daily limit. If you add these two together, they exceed the $2,000 daily limit. And this can be used by the PCard office of the department to reach out to this cardholder user and explain to him the abuses of splitting and the potential ramifications of continuing to circumvent the university policy. This enables the PCard office to go in and be more independent so they can understand the data, they can see how the reports are generated and where they came from. In addition to that, if they wanted to see, okay, this is how it is in the system, and now I want to show you how it is in the reports. This same query was exported out in an Excel format in order for the PCard office and the departments to use. So we're going to go to the PCard split summary report, which is the one we were just looking at. And that's the same report. Unfortunately, in Excel, you don't get the nice blue link to go right into the detail. But here's that transaction that we looked at. But what the system did create was the detail for this. So what we do is we provide the PCard office and the department the detail of the transactions that we saw in a total report for each user within that report. So they're able to see the same things, except they have an Excel report. So they don't have to go and print that report and send it to the department. The system already generated it, and the department can either begin access to share drive, or from the share drive emailed out to them this particular report without having them to have to generate the report. We set up the system so the user is going to need to take responsibility for the system in total. They're going to need to go in and change the parameters and identify things that they want to do. We just set up the structure for them in order to keep our independence. You know, we want to help them with the technical issues, but we want them to be the owners of the system. So I want to show you how they can go into IDEA and actually look at what parameters were set up in IDEA through the history. If they go in here, they can go through. This shows you how everything was generated, what was run, and then if you look and see, these are the parameters that are set up in IDEA for this report. We wanted to go in through the INI function, which identifies by name whether the name is anywhere in the description field of the vendor, and you'll see that the PCard office now is able to see, okay, we have Kmart, Macy's, Nordstrom. You know, I've been finding that JCPenney's is coming up a lot. So what we want to do is we want to take out Costco. Costco is an issue. We want to replace it with JCPenney. So they can go into the system, see how it works, understand it even better, and then identify, you know, what they need to change. Okay? So this is the great thing about the power of IDEA and how it allows you to make that transition from creating the system to user, where the user has a tremendous amount of resources to be able to make adjustments to the system. Okay. The last thing, one of the last things I wanted to show you is that what happens is you generate this report and on a periodic basis, but let's say I created this for April, but now I want to import March's transactions. If I go ahead and run, if I download that file and I put it into the shared drive, and then I create and I run the script to import the new month in, what it's going to do is going to override into here all those queries, and then the PCard office won't be able to use the old information to identify what they have done in the past, or they may just want to clear it out altogether. So what we did is we created a clean out function, and we actually, in order for me to create this, I had to reach out to IDEA, and they helped me, the automation, the help desk, they helped me tremendously to do this, because I could get certain parts of it. I could close all these different queries, but I couldn't erase them. But basically what we want to do is clean this out so a new download of data can come in and be imported and not be mixed into the last month's data. So in order to do that, we created a clean out function which goes in, closes all these scripts, and then deletes them. And I'll show you how it works. You just double click on it, and then we run it. And what it's doing, it closes them, and then you'll see in the file we had all those scripts in, and the import script, what it did, or import query script, what it did is it went in, closed all the files, and cleaned it out. So now this gives the PCard manager the ability to come in, import new data on a clean field, and it isn't convoluted with last month's data. The final thing I want to show you is we created a standalone application for our PCard Office Manager because they don't have the staff and the technical skills. We felt that the scripting, if we asked them to run scripting and go through here and generate the scripting and had to see all that, I know some of you, when you saw the scripting, you probably ran it for the exits. But in order to make this a simple and easy process for our PCard office who didn't have the expertise and slowly work them into getting more responsibility in the system, we initially set up as its own executable program. In other words, all the PCard Office Manager had to do was to go into Amex, download the data they needed. Then on their desktop, there would be an icon of program. They double-click on the program. It would actually open up IDEA. They didn't even have to open up IDEA, and it would run its own executable program and create all the exception reports, run all the queries, and do all the imports. In order to do that, all you have to, so you're wondering, so I was able to generate these scripts, and now I want to create an own executable program. Anybody who knows programming knows, well, then I'm going to have to compile that. I'm going to have to create its own library. IDEA completely eliminates that, the tedious and difficult technical part of that, and it's basically you can create your own executable program once you create your scripts, and it's 2 simple, easy steps. Once you're in the macro and you identify the script you want to compile to make a standalone program, you go to File, you go Build. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a script so you have a standalone program, and as you see at the end it's .exe, so it's its own program. Click on that. You identify where you want to save it. In this case, we're going to save it to our desktop. And what we're going to say is, call it PCard Program Review, and save. And we also want to create that for our cleanup. So it's just a simple button click. We don't have to deal with all these scripting and so forth. Clean this up a little. So I do a cleanup. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I go to File. I want to build. I'm going to leave that name. I want to save it to my desktop. And save. Okay. Now that we've created that, on our desktop, there should be 2 icons. Here they are. And they're standalone programs that can be run now by the PCard office without even having to open IDEA to run the monthly or periodic reports and the cleanup in order to clean out any reports that have been generated. So I'm going to go in and close IDEA. This IDEA, I'm going to go ahead and close it. So then all the PCard manager has to do is go into Amex, run the template to create the report, and I'm going to just show you the share drive again. So this is the report. Let's get rid of what we've generated in the past. Okay, we need to leave in the text file. That's going to be imported into Excel, but into IDEA. But then once I double click on this program, it's going to go in, open up IDEA, import the data, create the queries, create the reports, export in Excel out to the shared drive, the exception reporting that's going to be used by the PCard office and the departments. So here we go. As you can see, it opened IDEA, it generates on its own. It's a standalone executable program, and it starts generating and populating the reports. And here are all the reports for the PCard office and users. We didn't even have to open IDEA, and this really resolved the resources problems that the PCard office has and the expertise in order to create something like this. But again, the system is set up so they can go in and make changes. They can identify changes that they need to be made, and now they're responsible to maintain and clean up and make any changes to the system. And I'm just going to show you. I'm going to run the clean out, and you'll see how to go and close all these applications, and it will delete all the files that were created. And that's basically how we automated the process. So now I'm just going to go back to that PowerPoint, discuss the benefits of automating a PCard review process. By automating the PCard review process, we increase the frequency from monthly, semi-monthly, quarterly, based on our time, the PCard's office's time restraints. So now they can create at any point in time a daily report or review. They can create a weekly report or review, or they can do a monthly, depending on what their necessities are. Before they were, as you remember, they were doing 3/4 of the year or 75% of the year. They were only doing 20% of random testing. Now they have pinpointed exception reportings that they're following up, and they're able to do that pinpoint exception reporting based on parameters that are typical of abuses in PCards, and they can apply that to 100% of the population. So before, 80% of the time they were looking, or 75% of the time they were looking at 20% of the transactions. Now they're looking at 100% of the year. They're looking at 100% of all the transactions, and only identifying those that meet the criteria for typical inappropriate PCard purchases. This whole process allowed the PCard office to decentralize and put the responsibility more back to the departments, as now they have the tools and the resources to follow up on exception reporting instead of bombarding them with a bunch of different issues and potential random issues that could be out there. These are pinpointed based on criteria that have been set up to identify inappropriate charges. So the department has a much more smaller and less taxing review of potential inappropriate charges, and instead of having to go through all the potential charges without having any guidance or a particular scope to look at certain transactions that would be inappropriate. These reports are, remember, only based on outliers, so these are all exception reports. So it's a huge cost savings to the PCard office and the departments. This has provided the PCard office better customer services, as they're not inundated with looking at volumes and volumes of transactions. These are very specific transactions that have been identified as potential based on parameters set up to identify inappropriate charges. They're able to spend less time in doing that review process and spend more time assisting customers in the PCard process and providing them better service. The tests are much more focused, and this has been huge cost savings where they're able to work with less staff and do 100% coverage, where before they were required to have more staff and only do 20% of coverage. The last part I want to go into is the lessons learned through our data analysis. The main thing is what I recommend is start small and build. If you look at, I'm an ISACA member, a couple of my certifications are from there, and they have a white paper on data analysis, and one of the things they emphasize in there is to start small and then build. What we did at the end, where we automated everything and we made an executable program, that's at the highest stand. But to set up the queries and begin there and start to do that is very easy. And once you've created a query, and once you decided, the functions that need to create that query, you've created that, in order to go to the next step in scripting, it's very simple, especially if you use a macro record, because like I said, 90% of the time, once you use a macro record, it'll create all the scripting for you. You typically won't have to make an adjustment. If you do, they're very minor, and if you get stuck in any of those adjustments to the script based on your parameters or your environment that you're trying to create, the Ideal Help Desk will be an excellent source to help you out. They're very good, very patient, they're very helpful to our process. Going back to what we were saying before, we identified that 80% of all transactions relate to 20% of cardholder users, and you want to focus on those groups, those 20% that are doing most of all the transactions, because there's where you're going to find the most abuse and inappropriate charges. As I showed you, by showing the vendor file, we created robust queries. In other words, queries that can be edited and changed consistently, queries that are not static, that once you create them, they can only be used for a specific purpose. And a good example of how we did that is through the merchants, where we were able to go in and constantly change, whether it's a Macy's or a JCPenney. We can add or subtract any type of merchants. A lot of our queries are, the weekend one obviously changes consistently. The holidays, based on the university, based on our university schedule, we're able to go in there and change them on an annual basis. The unusual vendors, we had baby, we had advanced cash, but if you guys, for your particular group, find that there's certain keywords that are found in inappropriate PCard charges, then you can go in there and easily change them. That's what we talk about when we say robust queries, because you're able to go in and constantly change and add without having to recreate the whole process. The next thing is one of the biggest and most important things, and as part of your planning and setting up is you want to create, eliminate as much as possible any false positives. You don't want to create a bunch of reports and tax the PCard office, or in our case the PCard office or departments, with reports that have tons and tons of false positives, because they'll lose faith in what you're creating. So you really want to make sure that you take the time in the planning and upfront in the beginning to identify any potential false positives. Again, it looks difficult. It's very simple, especially through the macro record function to create scripting. That's eventually where you want to end up, because you don't want to have to create, for each query, you don't want to have to constantly go in and recreate the functions. What you want to do is have them automated through scripting. And like I said, if you use a record function, you can go in there and look and see how IDEA sets up each one of those. And it's a good learning process because it'll help you understand how to script, and also how to use functions in different ways. One of the big things we touch upon is auditor independence. That's a big issue whenever we were audit and advisory, and it's a role we've taken in the university to be provide audit advisory services to departments, and that's a big part of how we set this up. We set up the technical, we set up the infrastructure for the PCard office, but everything is very editable, and we made them choose what are the parameters, what keywords do you want, what vendors do you want, what time frame, what queries do you want to use. So we put the onus on them. They're the owners of the parameters, which runs a program. We're only setting up the structure and the technical and advising them, and that's how we maintain our independence. What I always say is you have to live and breathe the data. The person responsible for monitoring these session reports has to really spend the time and the depth to do the analysis. Once you start using the data more and more and more, you'll start to see trends. It's kind of corny, but it sounds like the Matrix, where you see everybody sees the ones and zeros running down the screen. But then, you know, in the movie The Matrix, people could understand and see different things from that. And that's the same with the corny analysis. That's the same way that that the person in charge of using IDEA to do the data analysis, you'll start seeing trends. You'll start seeing how data should and shouldn't be, and you'll start to see how these reports consistently produce the same users or card holders. In our case, you saw the card holders were typically not on one report. If they had done inappropriate charges, they typically came up on a variety of reports, and that's when you really key in and say, okay, this is a really potential issue because they're consistently doing stuff that's being picked up based on our parameters and queries that would be consistent with an inappropriate charge. And the last thing is to use a lifeline to take the wording from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, that TV show with Regis, is, you know, use your lifelines. The IDEA helped us with our lifeline. Every time we got stuck, we want to do the clean out. Initially, when we wanted to determine what queries we should be using, we reached out to IDEA. They provided us PCard experts. When I couldn't figure out the cleanup, how to clean up the queries that were generated so I can put in a new month of data without having to be mixed in with the previous month, the IDEA help desk was able to help me with that and help me get past that. So please use that. We also use the lifelines like ACUA. ACUA, initially when we set up our audit to do the PCard data analysis, we reached out to ACUA and we put out a request for ACUA members to provide us any queries that they've used. So definitely use all the resources out there, use all your lifelines, and the IDEA help desk is one of the more excellent ones, and they really take the time and effort to help out their customers. The next step for us is we're working the PCard office to develop policies and training to help departments properly analyze and use the reports that were created through the IDEA review process, so they can properly follow up with those and have a method of following up and reporting that back to the PCard office, so the PCard office doesn't have to consistently go and follow up on those issues. We want to make the departments responsible for their card holders. In addition to that, we've hired a data analyst auditor. The data analyst auditor is going to start working with other departments to develop similar data analysis tools. Right now she's looking at our AP group, working on a project there. We want to use data, we're using IDEA as our central repository for data analysis. All our users have the license, and through that we're able to share information and data analysis and data. Through that I've been able to take our financial transactions, which we've maintained our financial transactions in an Access database, and each year we have over 3 million transactions for all the financial transactions, and we've been using that in the past as our data analysis tool. What I've been able to do is incorporate that into IDEA. It goes to the data, I can't tell you how much faster. And it burns through the data so fast that before we had silos, we could only have fiscal year 2015 or fiscal year 2014 do an analysis. Now we're able to do analysis across years because I'm able to import multiple years into IDEA, and through that I'm able to do trend analysis and do a much more thorough and in-depth analysis of financial data for our audits. Finally, we're assisting departments to streamline their process. We've committed to work with the payroll department. They just went live on a new ERP system, and we were on an old legacy system, and we're working with them to create a bunch of routines to make sure that the whole implementation was done properly, and that we create proper monitoring reports for that process to make sure everything is being processed in the new system appropriately using old and new system data. We also have the accounts payable based on a training we had done with IDEA for our group. We found some inconsistencies in our account payable data, and right now our data analyst is working on that project to go through and see if we have any duplicate charges. The financial management group has also reached out to us and provided us data to see if we can do something similar that we've done to PCard. And also recently our CISO reached out to us as they acquired a new SIM, and they wanted to see if there's any way that we could use the IDEA to take some of that log information that's logged into the SIM and see how we can use it to provide better protection to the university's computer infrastructure. That's basically my presentation, and I want to pass it back to Lindsay, but I want to thank everybody for their time and patience, and please contact me if you have any questions or anything I can help you with in the future. I'll be more than happy to reach out and relay our experiences.
Thank you, Alex, for demonstrating how the University of Miami has set up their PCard review process. I think it was some really good information, and I think everybody learned a lot. I want to do a quick reminder of the benefits that we have for ACUA members. Automation Services is a ACUA strategic partner. So if you are a member of ACUA, you will receive preferred pricing on IDEA, IDEA Server. You'll receive discounts on renewal and maintenance, and IDEA training discounts. In addition to the analysis that can be done with IDEA for PCards, we also invite you to check out the Caseware Analytics PCard monitoring solution. You can find more information about this robust solution by contacting sales@automation.com, or you can go to casewareanalytics.com/solutions. And if you contact the sales team, we can walk you through IDEA, get you more information on training, or show you more about the monitoring solution. That's what we have for today. If you have any questions, you can email marketing@automation.com, and I will forward them to Alex. Thank you for participating and watching our webcast today, and we hope you have a good afternoon.